戻る。今会社に戻ります。
最初、5ページの最初を見てください。
以外、私は雨の日以外は自転車で学校に行く。
調べる。
わからない言葉は自分で調べてください。
表情。彼はとても表情が豊かですね。
入れる。彼はカバンに手帳を入れた。残る。料理がたくさん残りました。
ずっと。
ずっと日本へ留学したいと思っていました。
ただ、この温泉はただです。
絶対。そんなことは絶対できないよ。
きる。100歳まで生きたいです。
伝える。みんなにこのことを伝えてください。
難しい。この本は難しいですね。
存在。宇宙人は存在すると思いますか？
必要。これは授業に必要な本です。
右のポケットにハンカチが入っています。戻る。今会社に戻ります。
最初、5ページの最初を見てください。
調べる。
わからないこと。
以外、私は雨の日以外は自転車で学校に行く。
表情。彼はとても表情が豊かですね。 表情。彼はとても表情が豊かですね。
残る。料理がたくさん残りました。ただ、この温泉はただです。
絶対。そんなことは絶対できないよ。
存在。
難しい。
生きる。100。
必要。これは授業に必要な本です。
戻る。今会社に戻ります。
以外、
こ
こうしましょう。
う、もの。私は先ほど電話したものです。
開く。32ページを開いてください。
夏は30度以上の日が何日もあります。
たくさん。
私には友達がたくさんいます。残る料理がたくさん残りました。
初めて東京に来るのは初めてです。
絶対、そんなことは絶対できないよ。
戻る。今会社に戻ります。
なるほど、なるほど。よくわかりました。
すべて。彼にすべてのことを伝えた。
必要。これは授業に必要な
もの。作る。今朝ごはんを作っています。守る。彼は約束を守る人です。
漢字。あの子は漢字のいい子です。
開く32ページを開いてください。
笑う赤ん坊が笑っています。ごめん。
ごめん、ビールはない。
やめる。話すのをやめてください。感じる。膝に痛みを感じます。
以上。夏は30度以上の日が何日もあります。
たくさん。
私には友達がたくさんいます。
初めて。東京に来るのは初めてです。
お願い、お願いがあります。
状況。この状況では出発は難しいです。
こんにちは。Today, we're going to talk about tenses. Up to now, we've only been using one tense, and that is the one represented by the plain dictionary form of verbs taberu, eat, aruku, walk, and so forth. To use natural-sounding Japanese, we need 3 tenses. You might think they would be past, present, and future, but in fact they're not. The one we've been using up to now is not a present tense. It's called the non-past tense, and a lot of people think this is confusing. Why can't Japanese have a simple present tense like English instead of something vague and mysterious like a non-past tense? Well, actually it isn't confusing at all, and what makes it confusing is, for a change, not the fact that Japanese is taught in a strange way, but the fact that English is taught in a strange way. The truth is that the Japanese non-past tense is very similar to the English non-past tense. What is the English non-past tense? Well, it is the plain dictionary form of English words. Eat, walk, etc. Why do I call it a non-past tense? Well, let's take an example. Suppose you get a message on your keitai saying, I walked to the cafe and now I eat cake and drink coffee. What would you know about the person who sent that message? Well, you'd know that it was not a native English speaker, wouldn't you? Because no native English speaker says, I eat cake and I drink coffee, when they mean I am eating cake and drinking coffee right now. When do we say I eat cake? Well, we might say it when we mean that we eat cake sometimes. I eat cake. I'm not one of these people who doesn't eat cake. I do eat cake. Whenever there's any cake around, I eat it. Well, that doesn't mean I'm eating cake right at this moment. When else do we use the English non-past plain form of verbs? Well, sometimes we use them for future events. Next week, I fly to Tokyo. Next month, I have an exam. And sometimes we use them for something that's going on right now, but not mostly. For example, in a literary description. The sun sinks over the sea, and a small, happy robot runs across the beach. But that isn't the way we use it most of the time in everyday speech, is it? So, the Japanese non-past tense is very similar in the way it functions to the English non-past tense. If you can understand one, you can pretty much understand the other. Most of the time, the Japanese non-past tense refers to future events. Inu ga taberu, the dog will eat. Sakura ga aruku, Sakura will walk. The way we've been using it up to now, Sakura walks, is possible, but it isn't the most natural way. We've been using it that way because it was the only tense we knew. If we want to say something more natural, like Sakura is walking, what do we do? Well, what do we do in English? In English we say, don't we? Sakura is walking. We use the word to be. You can be walking. Sakura is walking. We are walking. Fortunately, in Japanese we don't have all these different forms of the word to be. We use the same word every time, and the word is iru. Iru means be in relation to animals and people, and to make this continuous present tense, we always use iru. So, Sakura is walking, Sakura ga aruite iru. Dog is eating, inu ga tabete iru. Now let's notice that in a sentence like inu ga tabete iru, we have something we haven't yet seen, and that's a white engine. A white engine is an element that could be an engine, but in this case, it's not the engine of this sentence. It's modifying or telling us more about one of the core elements of the sentence. So, the core of this sentence is inu ga iru. The dog is. But the dog isn't just existing, the dog is doing something. And that white engine tells us what it is doing. It is eating. And we're going to see this white engine structure over and over again as we go deeper into Japanese. And just as in English, we don't say the dog is eat. We use a special form of the verb that goes along with the verb of being. So in English we say is walking, is eating. In Japanese we say tabete iru, aruite iru. Now, how do we form this te form, which is the form we use when making the continuous present? With a word like taberu, it's very easy indeed. All we have to do is take off the ru and put te in its place. The bad news is that with other verbs, we do have slightly different ways of attaching the te. Apart from the plain ru form, there are 4 other ways. The textbooks will say 5, but in fact 2 of them are so similar that we can treat them as 4. And I've made a video on exactly what these ways are. And I think it makes it much simpler than most explanations. So it's very important to watch that so that you can learn how to form the continuous present tense. The good news is it's perfectly regular. Once you know the ending of a verb, you also know how to put the te onto it. The only one that's a bit tricky is ru ending verbs, but the video will explain that. So how do we put things into the past tense? Fortunately, that's very easy indeed. All we do is add ta. That's the whole thing. So, inu ga taberu, dog will eat. Inu ga tabeta, dog ate. Now there are different ways of attaching ta to different kinds of verbs with different endings. But the good news here is that they are exactly the same as the ways that you attach te. So once you've learned the ways that te attaches, you've also learned the ways that ta attaches. So if you watch that te form video, you'll be able to do both the continuous present and the past. Now there's one more thing about time expressions that I think is useful to learn now. If we want to make it clear when we say watashi wa keiki o taberu, that we're talking about a future event, we can say ashita, which means tomorrow. Ashita keiki wo taberu. Tomorrow I will eat cake. And that's all we have to do. We just say tomorrow before we say the rest of the sentence, just as we do in English. Tomorrow I'm going to eat cake. Ashita keiki wo taberu. Now, tomorrow is what we call a relative time expression because it's relative to today. Today is yesterday's tomorrow. And with all relative time expressions like that, yesterday, last week, next year, and so forth, times that are relative to the present time, we just do what we did then. We put the time expression at the beginning of the sentence, and that puts the whole sentence into that time. However, when we have an absolute time expression, an expression which is not relative to the present, such as Tuesday or 6 o'clock, then we have to use ni. Tuesday is kayobi, and we may say kayobi ni keiki wo taberu. When we have an absolute time expression, an expression sentence into that time. However, when we have an absolute time expression, an expression which is not relative to the present, such as Tuesday or 6 o'clock, then we have to use ni. Tuesday is kayobi, and we may say kayobi ni keiki wo taberu. On Tuesday, I will eat cake. Now, the important thing here is that it can seem a bit complicated to have to work out, is a time absolute or relative? And the good thing to know here is that it's not complicated at all because it works exactly the same as English. In English, we say, tomorrow I eat cake. Next week, I have an exam. And so forth. But when we use an absolute time expression, we say, on Monday, I will eat cake. At 6 o'clock, I have an exam. If we're talking about a month, we say, in July, I'm going to Tokyo. Now, Japanese works in exactly the same way, except that we don't have to remember when we're using on, when we're using at, and when we're using in. In Japanese, we use ni every time. But In English, when we need one of those little words, on, in, or at, then we need ni in Japanese. And when we don't, then we don't need ni in Japanese. English and Japanese are identical in that respect. So rather than sitting down to work out is this relative or is this absolute, just think whether you need an on, in, or at in English, and if you do, you need ni in Japanese. And if you don't need ni in Japanese. It's really as simple as that. Now, in these 4 lessons so far, we've covered an awful lot of Japanese, and now we're able to do quite a few things. So I think we need some way of consolidating this work. Therefore, I've made some worksheets. So if you're learning Japanese for the first time, or if you want to refresh with some worksheets, I'm going to tell you how to get them in the information section below. So take a look there at the end of this video and I'll give you all the details. Now, I'd like to thank my 3 Producer Angel Gold Kokeshi patrons, Maria del Martello, Electric Dragonfly, and Pacifico Bon Magno. Thank you for your support. Thank you for helping to make this series and this work possible. And thank you to all my patrons on Patreon. And to everyone, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below and I will answer. Thank you for attending this lesson. Korikaramu, yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Class dismissed. Konnichiwa. Today we're going to talk about Japanese verb groups. Japanese verbs fall into 3 groups, and these don't matter except when we're going to make some change in the form of the verb. But because we do that pretty often, it's important to understand the 3 groups. The first group of Japanese verbs is called ichidan verbs, or one-level verbs. Some people call them ru verbs, which is a very silly name. If you're going to call them anything like that, we should probably call them, which is a very silly name. If you're going to call them anything like that, we should probably call them iru-eru verbs. They are the simplest and most basic kind of verb. When we want to make any change, we always do it the same way. All we do is take the ru off the end and put on whatever we want to put on. Ichidan verbs can only end with either iru or eru. That's to say, with one of the kana from the i-ro or one of the kana from the e-ro plus ru. The second group of verbs is by kana from the e with one of the kana from the i-ro or one of the kana from the e-ro plus ru. The second group of verbs is by far the largest, and any ending that a verb can have, verbs in this group can have. Verbs always end with the u sound, but not all. U kana can make the end of a verb, but a lot of them can, and all of them can make godan verbs. They are called godan verbs or 5-level verbs for reasons that we'll see shortly. And as I say, they can end in any u sound, including iru or eru. Unlike ichidan verbs, they can also end in oru, aru, or uru. So the only time we have any ambiguity is when we have a verb ending in iru or eru. Most of those verbs are ichidan verbs, but there is a substantial minority of iru, eru ending godan verbs. It's not as difficult to differentiate them as you might think, and I've made a video on that, although it's a little bit more advanced than this lesson. The third group of verbs is irregular verbs, and the good news here is that there are only 2 of them. You know those pages and pages of irregular verbs in your Spanish or French textbook? Well, Japanese has just 2. There are a couple of other verbs that are irregular in just one small respect, but very few. The irregular verbs are kuru, come, and suru, do. So now that we know the 3 groups, we're going to take a look at how you make them into the te and ta form. As I explained last week, we need those 2 forms for making the Japanese present and past tenses, and they have a number of other uses too, which we'll learn as we go along with this course. And as I demonstrated last week, ichidan verbs are always very easy. You never do anything except take off the ru and put on whatever you're going to put on, in this case a te or a ta. As for the godan verbs, they fall into 5 groups, as you would expect, godan, 5 level verbs. And I made a video about this a while ago, so what I'm going to do is run that video right now because I think it explains things pretty clearly. Alright, roll the video. Godan verbs have 5 kinds of possible ending. That's why they're called godan verbs, 5-level verbs. And although that seems a little bit difficult, it really isn't. We can combine 2 of the levels anyway, because they are so close that we only need to learn them once. And I'm going to go through the main groups. The first group is what I call the utsuru verbs. Those are the verbs ending in u, tsu, and ru. The word utsuru in Japanese, if you don't know it, now is a good time to learn it. Utsuru means to move from one thing to another, and that's exactly what we're doing here, moving our verbs from one type to another. So the verbs which end in u, tsu, and ru all transform in the same way to the te form. We take off the u, the tsu, or the ru, and we replace it with a small tsu plus te, or ta in the ta form. So, warau, laugh, becomes waratte. Motsu, hold, becomes motte. Toru, take, becomes totte. Now, you'll notice that utsuru has tsu in the middle, and the te form of the utsuru verbs is formed by using a small tsu plus that te. It's the only group that has tsu in it, and it's the only group that has a tsu in the te form ending. So it's really easy to remember. The second group is what I call the new boom group. In Japanese, when something is really taking off, when it's becoming popular, we call it a boomer. Boomer. That's an English word, isn't it? Boomer. A new boomer. So this group I call the new boomer group because there isn't a Japanese word that you can make out of nu, bu, and mu that I know of. And what I want you to notice about this group of verbs is that they all end in what I would call a dull sound. M, b. It's not a sharp sound like s, ts, k, and it's not a neutral sound like r or It's a dull sound. N, b, m. And this is important because the ending is also a dull sound. The te form ending is nde, the ta form is nta. So, shinu, the only nu ending verb, becomes shinde, shinda. Nomu, drink, becomes nonde, nonda. Asobu, play, becomes asonde, asonda. Play, non, shinda. Nomu, drink, becomes nonde, nonda. Asobu, play, becomes asonde, asonda. So that's the nubumu group, the dull ending. Verbs, and because only a limited number of the possible kana can be used as a verb ending, they include all the dull sounds except for gu, and we'll come to that right now. I told you that 2 of the groups were combined, and that is the ku and gu group. To make the te form of a ku ending verb, we cut off the ku and add ite or ita in the ta form. So aruku, walk, becomes aruite, aruita. Now, if we have a ten on that ku to make it into a gu, it's exactly the same except that there is also a ten on the te ending. So aruku becomes aruite. But oyogu, to swim, becomes oyoide. But as you see, the two are more or less identical. It's just that if there's a ten on the original verb, there's a ten on the te form too. Aruku, aruite, oyogu, oyoide. And now we just have one left, and that is su. And verbs ending in su, drop the su, and add shite. As you will notice, if you have followed our last lesson, we are just doing that regular thing of shifting the su kana to its iro equivalent shi. So hanasu, talk, becomes hanashite. The masu helper verb, which turns verbs into formal verbs in the past tense, becomes mashta. So there we have all the go-down verbs. Didn't I look young in that old video? Now we're just going to look at the exceptions. There are only 3 altogether. Mashta. So there we have all the go-down verbs. Didn't I look young in that old video? Now we're just going to look at the exceptions. There are only 3 altogether, are 2 irregular verbs and 1 other small one. And these are very simple. Kuru, come, becomes kite. Suru, do, becomes shite. And iku, the verb iku, to go. Because it ends in ku, you would expect it to become ite, but it doesn't, it becomes itte. And those are the only exceptions. So if you go over the video a couple of times, I think you'll find it pretty easy to know exactly how to make the te and ta forms in all cases. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below. And I'd like to thank my Gold Kokeshi patrons on Patreon for helping to make this video possible. And I'd like to thank all my patrons who make this work in unlocking Japanese possible. これからもよろしくお願いします。The end and put on whatever you want to put on. Inchidan verbs can only end with either iru or eru. That's to say, with one of the kana from the iro or one of the kana from the ero plus ru. The second group of verbs is by far the largest, and any ending that a verb can have, verbs in this group can have. Verbs always any ending from the with either iru or eru. Suru, do, and it on page. よろしくお願いします. Class dismissed. こんにちは. Today, we're こんにちは. Today, doesn't eat cake, I do eat cake. That could be an engine, but in this case, it's not the engine of this sentence. It's modifying or telling us more about one of the core elements of the sentence. So, the core of this sentence is inu. Ga iru. The dog is. But the dog isn't just existing, the dog is doing something. And that white engine tells us what it is doing. Iru, aru. Te iru. Now, how do we form this te form, which is the form we use for making the continuous present? With a word like taberu, it's very easy indeed. All we have to do is take off the ru and put te in its place. The bad news is that with other verbs, we do have slightly different ways of attaching the te. Apart from the plain rule form, there are 4 of konni. And those are the only exceptions. So if you go over the video a couple of times, I think you'll find it pretty easy to know exactly how to make the te and ta forms in all cases. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below.